discussion about what kinds of spirituality can be relevant for people, whether it be religious or other. Some people would define all forms of spirituality religious, but whether it be within the framework of established religions or otherwise.
I'm sorry, I was always thinking about that question, but I think the translation, Russian and English, it's like the meaning covers a little bit different things. When we say духовность, Russian, and we usually translate like spirituality. As I feel in English, it's like more really religious. While духовный человек, or to grow dуховность in a person, in Russian meaning, it's really to make the let me be very simple, a good person, to raise up a good person who knows the quite distinction between good and bad. So sometimes this difficulty of translation, let's say, would mislead us.
Yeah, but ultimately, I mean, these are all very difficult concepts. They all have rather difficult sort of relationships between how people articulate them and how they live their lives and how they use them in what they're trying to explore. And the answer, of course, is that we just have to talk about it and try to figure out what we mean and to have that discussion that's necessary in order to get further in our own understanding and our own appreciation.
And I would like to ask a question. How of course, we all agree that people, like in secular institutions, we have to study religions, but as I want to clarify if you meant that every student has to have a choice to study or not, and if do you have to study it in the field study, as for example, like Islam in politics, or in that sense, or as one religion as a whole, taking into consideration that nowadays, like all universities and like schools, they have all representatives of religious people. Like in all schools nowadays, we all see like different representatives of religion, and take into consideration that of course we cannot exclude the biased views of professors, or can we? Or do you have to separate the classes, like class on Islam or class on Christianity? Or do you have to study all of them in one class, comparing each other? And then you also mentioned that there was a class when they were studying the contradictions of Old and New Testaments. Will that somehow touch some person's spiritual values? And some other question I would like to ask you, what do you think about the very modern view of intelligent design?
Often in your question you use the term what we have to do or what the students have to do. And really what I'm talking about is what we should make possible. That is, I don't think it's useful to introduce a set of requirements about what students should study about religion. And I think that, for example, some Central Asian governments, for example, are introducing rules that in schools you have to study certain things about Islam, for example. I think that this is a bit problematic. But in the context of a liberal education, I think it's inevitable, as Ellen Hertzowitz was suggesting, that since religion is such an integral part of human experience, it is very strange that it's not taken on adequately as a subject in the context of many other things. And so if you study culture in many of its dimensions, it should be considered inevitable that you have to deal with religion as part of that culture, and it should be treated as an authentic and many-sided, perhaps a diverse basis for exploring that culture as well. You raised questions about how religion should be taught, and especially the question of what about the position of believers in this context, whether they're students or teachers. And one thing that I think that all study of religion in the liberal education context has to strive to achieve is the ability of those who have one set of beliefs, whether it be Christianity or Islam or atheism, the ability for those people to set aside their own beliefs when they ask questions about religion. And that doesn't mean that they become unbiased. Nobody becomes unbiased. Everybody has their own position, and it doesn't, there's no such thing as the teacher who has no bias in relation to the subject. But to strive to be able to go beyond your own view of things and try to understand how other people view these things, that, I think, is an essential part of a liberal education in general, and certainly in relation to religion. So, for example, on this question of the contradictions that I was noting that early Bible scholars brought out about I was talking about contradictions among the first 4 books of the New Testament, which, if you're not familiar with the Bible, these 4 books basically tell the same story, the story of Jesus' life from beginning to end. But they deal with the same events, but there's some differences in the way that they portray things. Different people are present at different moments and things like that. And for those who want to believe that the Bible is the Word of God and the Word of God should be considered perfect, this does create a bit of a problem. And how do you explain that there seems to be these contradictions? I don't think most Christians have too much trouble with this issue. That is, they just say, well, it's the Word of God, but it was written by people, and so they may have made some mistakes or whatever. And the Bible is generally considered to be a document that has to be interpreted. It's not something that's taken as just the document unto itself. It's a bit different with the Quran. The approach to the Quran is often a bit different in that regard, in that it's considered to be the text as it was dictated to Muhammad, and he passed it on, and then it was recorded on paper. So to the extent that Islamic studies scholars have pointed out things that seem contradictory, that is often taken by Muslims to be more of a challenge to their understanding of what kind of a document the Quran is. But in any of these cases, if you're in a liberal education context, you should be able to accept the fact that there are people who are noting these contradictions, and then you figure out yourself what you're going to make of the contradictions. Whether you consider, well, maybe they're just not reading it right, or maybe they are attaching too much importance to it, or whatever. This is a judgment that you have to make as an individual when you're. It doesn't help you not to know that people say that there are these contradictions. You're better to know it and then to figure out what you're going to do with it. On the question of intelligent design, for those who are not familiar with this, it's a notion that what happened is that it's an alternate explanation for evolution, Darwinian evolution, where for some Christians, because the story in Genesis is that the world was created in 7 days, people want to take that as the literal truth, and at the end of 7 days, there were all the species that we have today. Others have come up with other versions of the story and say, well, 7 days is what is the English word for conditional? It doesn't mean exactly 7 days. And some people have gone to different places in the Bible and said, well, it noted that it says in some places like one of our days was like 10 years or 1,000 years of other time or whatever. So people figure out different ways of dealing with these issues, but the basic idea is that evolution happened with God's intervention. And what do I think about that? It's another way to think about the world. I don't find the story as compelling as the Darwinian evolution, but I don't actually think that people who believe that are idiots or should be excluded from educational context. There is a real problem in American education today, not on the university level so much as the school level, where some people are arguing that intelligent design should be taught as an alternative theory to Darwinian evolution. And other people, secular-oriented people, consider this to be very dangerous. They consider this to be a real step backwards because though the theory of evolution, according to Darwin, is called a theory, it's really accepted